Good evening. Good evening. I'm Penny McPhee, the president of the Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation, and on behalf of Arthur and Angie Blank and their family, I'm pleased to welcome you to tonight's program, The Good Fight. We're partnering tonight with the Anti-Defamation League to bring you an update on the escalation of hate in America, the many forms that it's taking, and most importantly, to offer some solutions, especially solutions that focus on America's young people and hold promise for charting a new and hopefully healthier course for our country. Our foundation will define success tonight by our collective ability to stimulate action. We all sometimes question whether there's anything we can do as individuals to make a difference on the big societal issues. After all, the problems seem so overwhelming and individual contributions feel so small that it's easy to remain on the sidelines. The one thing tonight's program must make clear is that the actions of each of us matter. So for each of you here tonight, and everyone joining us via our live stream, the Foundation joins with the ADL in challenging you to reflect on what you personally can do to join the good fight. You'll hear from the ADL about lots of different ways that you can participate. Everyone here tonight can and must respond to what you hear with your own brand of personal commitment. This is one of those cases where Arthur Ashe's admonition genuinely applies. Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. The good news is that the ADL staff is ready to help match you up with opportunities that align with your passions. As longtime supporters of the ADL, Mr. Blank and the Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation will continue to identify opportunities where we can engage more deeply to fight against hate. And later tonight, you'll hear more about a new grant that we're making to help area schools participate in ADL training programs. From the earliest days of our speaker series, Arthur challenged us to focus on getting the right people in the room. Thanks to the ADL's help, we think we've hit the mark tonight. Not only do we have a full house, we almost always have a full house, but we have a diverse group of leaders, and the mix is inspiring. There are a few folks I want to particularly recognize. You'll see, or you already have seen, a number of students in the room. I hope you had a chance to meet some of our American explorers during the reception. These high school students from Atlanta's West Side are participating in a 4-year leadership development program run by the Foundation. We try to give them as many opportunities as we can to learn and to serve. Tonight was one of those opportunities. We're also honored to have with us tonight a group of Atlanta Falcons players who are leading the Falcons Social Justice Committee, as well as head coach Dan Quinn and other Falcons executives. I want to thank the Falcons especially for their leadership around these issues, and thank you for being here. We're joined as well by Jocelyn Moore from the National Football League. Jocelyn is working with all 32 teams to advance their social justice agendas. Several of our Blank Family Foundation board members are with us tonight: Kenny and Nancy Blank, Elise Eplin, Suzanne Apple, and Bill Bowling. Thank you all for being here. And finally, I want to welcome the ADL board members and staff who are partnering with us tonight. Thank you for your partnership. Most of all, I want to thank Arthur and Angie Blank for supporting these kinds of community conversations and for the many ways they lead by example. Arthur and Angie had planned to join us tonight, but the death of a dear friend today required them to change their plans. I also want to thank John Baer, the Foundation VP, who produces our speaker series so thoughtfully. He and I are very grateful that we have been given this platform to help make a difference. In just a moment, I'll turn the program over to George Saleem from ADL, who will update you on ADL's work and facilitate a conversation with our panelists. I encourage you to consult your program for detailed bios of our three panelists, Jonathan Broder, Christian Piccolini, and Jayla Moody. We're honored to have them with us tonight. Thank you. But first, before we turn to George and our panel, we have a short video that shows many of the ways people are joining the good fight. Thank you for being here.
My good fight is bringing awareness to immigration because I feel like people lack the understanding of how hard it is to come to this country and be someone.
My good fight is standing up for women's rights, especially in my workplace, where my female colleagues have been marginalised by our superiors.
My good fight is class in the society. Recognize our worth, not by what we wear or the schools we went to.
My good fight is bringing awareness to bullying and how it affects kids, especially in elementary schools, because it's something that at this day and age shouldn't be an issue, but it really is a big issue still.
My good fight is fighting loneliness for seniors. I felt lonely in my life, and that's not something that you want to feel.
My good fight is fighting for immigration reform, and I'm passionate about it because I'm personally an immigrant. My whole family is immigrants.
My good fight is being open to helping everyone. I think it's part of my responsibility as a physician to care for everyone and love everyone.
As a Black Muslim woman in America, my good fight is simply existing at the intersections that I do and taking self-care and self-preservation very seriously and being able to offer that to other folks around me.
That's my good fight.
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 Penny, thank you very much for your introduction. Let me just start with a few quick acknowledgments. I'd like to thank Penny and the great folks from the Blank Foundation for hosting us here today. And full disclosure, until I started working at the ADL about 7 months ago, I had never heard of the Blank Foundation. I didn't know about the work that you all had done. And I know, it's shocking. It's shocking. And I didn't know that the level of collective impact that the foundation has done, continues to do, and will be doing for the years to come was so tremendous. I'm honored to have come to know the great work that ADL has partnered with the Blank Foundation, with the Falcons, and many other folks who are here tonight, and thrilled to be part of this conversation here today. Having spent over a dozen years working in the federal government and traveling across the world, I've seen many partnerships that were impactful, meaningful, and long-lasting. And I think that the many partnerships with the ADL and with many other organizations and on issues that the Blank Foundation has done is among the most impactful, thoughtful, and really meaningful work that any organization can do. And I've seen a lot of them. So thank you to the folks from the Blank Foundation for your hospitality and for this event tonight. I'd like to also thank some of the Falcons players that I got a chance to meet in the room next door. When you think about professional sports, you can think about the players you see on the field, but I think a good demonstration in terms of some of the folks that are here today and the great work that the Falcons have been doing is off the field as well. And really the leadership that some of these players have demonstrated on and off the field is really tremendous, and I just want to acknowledge their really impactful work off the field as well, because it doesn't always get cheers and it doesn't always fill stadiums. But it's meaningful and it touches the lives of many people. So thank you for your extra effort. Friends, we live in a time where many of the seeds of liberty have been manipulated to advance hateful agendas, and more Americans today are being taught to hate. I use the term taught because we are not born like this, genetically at least. But many of our fellow citizens have somehow learned to use their freedom of speech to spew conspiracy theories, anger, bigotry, anti-Semitism, and xenophobia. Since 1979, the Anti-Defamation League has conducted an annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents, providing a brief snapshot of this type of problem nationwide, identifying these trends and new threats to both the security and liberty of the Jewish people, but of all communities across the globe, which we aim to serve and protect. Last year, we found that anti-Semitic incidents in America had surged. And for the first time in the last decade, there were incidents in all 50 states in the Union. All 50 states. When I've shared this statistic with other audiences, some of the questions I get are, George, what was the act of anti-Semitism in Alaska? What was the act of anti-Semitism in Hawaii? And the fact is that for over the past 3 or 4 decades that the ADL has been recording this, never once, never a single time has there been a reported incident of anti-Semitism in all 50 states, but there was in calendar year 2017. There was a 94% increase in anti-Semitism from the numbers that we recorded in 2016 in K through 12 classrooms across the United States. Jews are by far not the only victim to hate, bigotry, and xenophobia. According to the FBI data in 2016, the largest single increase in religiously motivated violence was against Muslim Americans in this country, a 19% increase again from 2015. And race-based crimes are the most numerous that we see in America today, with more than 50% of race-based crimes being directed at African Americans or those who are perceived to be African Americans by people who are bigoted or racist. Extremists use the internet on a day-to-day basis to virally spread their hate, and they are increasingly skilled in recruiting on college and university campuses across the country. And I think if anyone saw the press coming out of Charlottesville, Virginia last summer, we all know this example too well. Platforms like Twitter and Facebook have become weaponized. Facebook and Twitter, I'll repeat that one more time, have become weaponized to terrorize reporters, to bully children, to intimidate activists, and to manipulate public opinion. Hate left unchecked across this country escalates, and it makes us weaker at this time in history, especially at a time when we need it the most. We research at the ADL patterns and trends in anti-Semitism and extremism and bigotry and hate crimes violations, and we partner with members of the law enforcement community, civil leaders, and we work closely with educators, technologists, and other partners to help prevent the growth and spread of hatred and bigotry, particularly helping to prevent it from spiraling into a cycle of violence like we see all too often. Each year, we work with over 15,000 men and women in federal, state, and local law enforcement across the country, and we partner with a minimum of 1.5 million children to counter bias, hate, and all forms of extremism across the United States. Friends, tonight we look forward to working with all of you to embrace this moment in history in which we are in. Our fellow Americans need people in this room and well outside of this room to come and work together, because if we don't, these challenges will upend our great nation and destroy the lives and spirit of our fellow citizens. I'd like to thank the Blank Foundation and our gracious hosts once again for having us tonight. And in just a second, I'm going to introduce our next panel. Thank you. This is the more relaxed setting at the chair. Formal remarks are over. Time to introduce 3 people who, if you haven't met them already, I'd encourage you each to take a moment tonight and shake each one of their hands, because they're remarkable people and your lives will be enriched from spending even just a few seconds with them. Let me start out by introducing a longtime colleague, friend, and inspiration, maybe, to many people within the ADL, to myself, and hopefully after tonight to many people in this room. Let me introduce Christian Aleni, who is a former white supremacist in the United States, who recognized the errors in his ways and in his logic and has turned towards peace and tolerance, and now fights to disengage white supremacists from the movement that he once helped recruit them for. Please cue the video.
The Jews control the media and finance system. Immigrants are coming into our country to steal our jobs.
Of Muslims entering the United States.
Blacks are lazy and commit crimes. And the word diversity is a code word for white genocide. We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. Or so I believed.
More to come. That was the teaser. To my left, Jayla Moody, a 2015 Miller Grove High School alumni and valedictorian, is currently studying journalism, global development, and French on an honors international track at Mercer University in Macon, Georgia. In addition, Jayla pursues her interest in social justice and international development through her work with the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, and was a delegate of our 2013 National Youth Leadership Mission and participated in our ADL Campus Leadership Mission to Israel in 2016. Last but not least, she has served as a No Place for Hate delegate at the local, national, and international levels, and her work has continued to feed her passion of providing a voice to the voiceless, as she puts it. She recently presented at the International Bullying Prevention Conference in Nashville, Tennessee, about her work with the Anti-Defamation League. Let's have a quick look at that work.
Our education work works hand in hand with the Center on Extremism. While Charlottesville was unfolding, we were following their really important reporting on what was happening. We were hearing from teachers that they wanted to find ways to answer the kids' questions in the classroom, and family members were wanting to know, how should I talk about this with my kids? We created the lesson plan and the table talk about Charlottesville. We have something called the Current Events Classroom, where we take issues of the day, and this was obviously a big issue of the day, and create interactive lesson plans that can help teachers really bring up these topics with students.
Last but not least, let me introduce El Basha, Jonathan Broder. Basha is a very honorific term in Arabic, of which we have a fluent speaker here on the panel with us. Jonathan is an award-winning journalist whose career has spanned more than 4 decades. He has worked as a foreign correspondent for the Chicago Tribune, an editor for NPR and Congressional Quarterly, and a senior writer for Newsweek. His writing has also appeared in various notable other publications across the globe. Jonathan not only wrote the last chapter in the book that's in the pamphlet on the table, No Place for Hate, wrote the No Place for Hate chapter in The Good Fight, but also wrote the caption to every photo in the book, as well as the introductory pages for each and every chapter. It's a thrill and a pleasure to introduce Jonathan Broder.
This really chilling picture of a Ku Klux Klan grandmother kissing her 6-month-old granddaughter.
Wow.
You feel the hatred being passed on.
You know, people talk about publishing is dying, like books are dying. No way, not when they're like this.
No. The Good Fight, America's ongoing struggle for justice, highlights these groups and their battle for equality over the last century.
Native Americans, women, Muslims, Latinos, and the LGBT community are just some of the many minority groups who share a complex history here in the U.S.
A story about all the different civil rights struggles, a story about the role that the Jewish people had faced in this country over 100 years.
It's an incredible book. It features a series of nearly 200 photos, 60 embedded videos, and dozens of essays.
1 out of every 3 pictures in this book, you point your phone at the photograph and it plays a YouTube video or a TED Talk.
We're trying to not go backwards right now because so much of this progress has been so hard fought by so many people, and it's a very inspiring story.
But more than anything, I think it's a testament to the pluralism of this country. Because civil rights is not a liberal issue. It's not a Jewish issue. It's not an immigrant's issue. It's everyone's issue.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to start with a few easy ones, and then we'll get the panel a little bit excited, and we'll get a little bit interesting. But Christian, I want to go back, and I want to start with you. One of the things that we see in some of the videos was Jayla talking about some of her work, working with young people, and as she deemed it, being a voice for the voiceless. As you think about your own journey through this path, many of us on a day-to-day basis, we look back and we say, something in our life we wish we could have changed, or something at times, I know myself, I'd like to speak to my younger self and give my younger self some advice or a course correction, if you will. When you think about having a conversation with your younger self, what does that conversation look like, and what is that advice?
Thanks for pitching my next book, by the way. That is actually my next book. It's a letter to my 14-year-old self.
Wow. I didn't know that, by the way.
You didn't know that, but thank you. You know, when I work with people, because I've for the last 15 or 16 years helped pull people out of hate groups and hateful ideologies, and I treat them as if they were me at 14. Because I really do believe in treating the child and not the monster. I wish that a baseball coach or a football coach or a teacher or somebody in my community had seen that I was lonely and angry and acting out for attention at first, because like you said, I was not born racist. In fact, I was the opposite. My parents were also immigrants who came from Italy. And it wasn't a way that I was raised, so I did learn it. And I learned it because I wanted to belong. That was what was more important. I've helped over 120 people leave hate groups, and every single one of them will tell you that the reason that they joined or became involved was because they were looking for acceptance. Not because they were racist, not because they had that as part of their fiber, but because they were looking for identity, community, and purpose.
Thank you. Jonathan, I want to turn to you to help tease out something I mentioned in your introduction. The book, The Good Fight, chronicles civil rights stories all together in one place and packages them in a really comprehensive way, I think. And when you're thinking about civil rights in the American history context, the book, The Good Fight, chronicles the story of Jewish Americans, Muslim Americans, the disabled community, and so on. And so whether you're fighting for equal rights, disability rights, LGBTQ rights, you really see these all kind of packaged together in one compendium here. Why do you think it was so important to not just write a book on African American civil rights struggle or the Jewish community's work in this space? Why did you think it was so important to put these all together? And what is the takeaway for readers in that sense?
Well, there's a pretty simple answer. It's because all of these groups, they're all Americans. And, you know, the United States, through the Constitution and the Declaration of the ideals that are embodied in the Declaration of Independence, and the laws, the body of law that has evolved since our independence, and the courts, these are sort of our secular Bible. And they create an American identity that is an overarching identity that subsumes our hyphenated identities, the Jewish American, Muslim American, disabled American, African American, or Latino American. Those identities are secondary to the overarching identity of American. Now, you'll appreciate this, and people that have been in the Middle East will understand this, that in the Middle East, you have countries that are trying very hard to create an overarching national identity, like Iraqi or Syrian or Lebanese, and they're failing. An Iraqi Kurd is a Kurd before he's an Iraqi. A Shia in the south of Lebanon is basically Shia before he's Lebanese, or she's Lebanese. We don't have that. We have this overarching identity, and therefore, to put all of these groups together into one book, The Good Fight, it's an American fight.
Yeah.
It's not just an individual identity fight. It's our fight.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. I want to turn to Jayla and ask her a question, and then I would like to ask the audience for you all to get involved. I want you all to start thinking about questions. We have a mic in the front. We have 2 mics in the aisle. So start thinking about questions you'd like to ask some of our panelists, because I'd like to get you involved as well. But Jayla, one of the titles here, and given your work history with the ADL, given the title of the book, The Good Fight, right, this represents in some way, I think the word fight means different things to different people. And I was saying to Ben when we were in the room earlier, he asked a question about the title, and I was explaining to him that the purpose or the function of the struggle for civil rights, the struggle for equality and justice and fair treatment for all is worthy of this title, The Good Fight, because it is a struggle in many ways. What is your thoughts or your emphasis on this title, The Good Fight, and what does it mean to you?
Well, I think the good fight in general should be a collective idea between us all. Just like my colleagues on the panel were saying, it's not just something that has to do with us as an individual. A good fight can mean different things to many people, but if we all have the same underlying goal at the end, we can all make sure that everyone is included in this fight. So when we think about the good fight, we have to make sure that a platform is provided for everyone to say what they need and what they want out of this fight. We spend a good amount of our time trying to serve and assist others, but if we haven't stopped to hear from them first,
Yes.
To provide them with that voice that we were talking about earlier, then we may not know what it is that they need or what it is that they want or what they feel like they're missing from this American identity. So some people may identify first with their second identity before they can get to the American identity. And sometimes that can come because people aren't trying to hear what it is that they want out of this good fight. So if we can take the time to listen to everyone and listen to their idea of the good fight, we can make sure that it is collective and that it is encompassing of everyone who deserves it.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask one more question, and we're going to kind of move down the panel, and then we're going to turn it over to the audience to jump in with a few questions as well. So my last moderator prerogative question, I think, for the whole panel is, each of you have been involved with the ADL through different programs and initiatives throughout the years. What have you learned from your varying experiences with ADL that you want to take away to share with this group of motivated and concerned citizens here today? Maybe Christian, if we don't mind starting with you, and we'll move on down.
My first interaction with the ADL was in 1991 when I appeared in their report. So they're very good at what they do, to say the least. What I've learned is, the ADL is not just fighting for the rights of Jewish people. The ADL really is fighting for human rights. They're doing the work of humanity. Because when one of us is marginalized, really we're all marginalized. When we're broken, when one of us is kind of put off to the side, or a group of people, we are breaking this American dream that we've never really fulfilled yet. So I really appreciate the ADL for over 100 years of service, committed to fighting racism and bigotry, but more than anything else for not being exclusive and working for the human rights of everybody, and that's important to me.
Thank you. Jonathan?
I learned a lot about the ADL as a result of working on this book. My exposure to the ADL up until then had been basically that of a journalist. I knew them as a human rights defense organization, a Jewish defense organization. I must say that I associated them much more with defense of the Jewish community than I did with other communities, until I researched this book and realized how broad their mandate is. And that mandate goes back to its founding principle. I mean, when the ADL was started back in 1913, yes, it was started out as an organization that was meant to fight for everybody, not just Jews. And the idea was that we're all linked, that, we're all brothers and sisters. And if you defend one, you must defend all. What was particularly interesting to me, though, was actually the work of the division of the ADL that you are now the head of, which is the Center on Extremism. I learned, and you'll see it in the book, that in the last days of the 2008 campaign. The ADL was instrumental in preventing an assassination attempt, a very serious assassination attempt, on Barack Obama as a candidate. There were two white supremacists, I believe in Kentucky or Tennessee, I can't remember, it's in the book, but they had a plot. They were going to murder something like 40 African-American children and their parents, and then they were going to meet up with Obama on his last campaign stop before the November election and kill him with a high-powered rifle. And after they worked out this plot, they went off on a shooting spree and shot the windows out of a number of buildings and churches in Tennessee. And they got arrested. So the local police questioned them and ended up searching their home, and they found an enormous cache of weapons. Not just a few rifles, but a lot of rifles, a lot of guns, and a lot of explosives. So they called up the FBI and the ATF. So the federal authorities got involved, and they questioned these guys. And under questioning, they acknowledged this plot that I just described to you. So the first thing that the federal law enforcement had to do was to find out whether these guys were acting alone, whether they were part of a larger group that were going to carry out this plot, even though two of their members got arrested. So they did. So they needed to find out, like, who are these people? Who did they go to? They went to the ADL, to the Center on Extremism, and within, I think, several hours, the ADL had put together a, I don't know, like a 40 or 50-page dossier on not only these guys who they knew about,
the network,
but the whole network and all the groups. And it was invaluable. There's a speech that you can find online where James Comey, who was then still the head of the FBI, good old James, praised the ADL. I mean, it sounded like a huge wet kiss, in the speech that he gave, and it was very moving because he basically said that, we can't do this alone, and we need help from organizations like yours, and your help was invaluable in breaking this up. So, I mean, and as a journalist, this is somebody who appreciates a good story. This was a great story. So,
how many of you have heard of that plot? Anybody? You would have if you would have subscribed to the ADL.
Right. And you will if you buy the book. Right.
Thank you for that commercial. Sorry. So Jayla, what we take from this last round here is that whether it's the reporting that ADL does in some ways, and it's negative or positive depending on kind of where you sit at the time, but ultimately it's the subject matter expertise, it's the research, it's the analysis. We've covered that piece of it. But something that Penny mentioned earlier is getting involved in the solutions business and doing something to stem the tide of hatred and bigotry and bias. And you've been really instrumental in some of the organic work that young people have pioneered across the country for the ADL in this regard. Tell us a little bit about your experience with the ADL in the solutions business to help get ahead of some of these trends that we've seen.
Right. So my ADL story is obviously extremely different from what we've just heard. But I fell in love with the ADL in 2013 when they took a visit to my South DeKalb County High School. And they showed me that everything that's in this pamphlet right here was exactly what they were doing. They came to our classroom and they wanted to talk to us about cyberbullying and bullying from its root. They wanted to talk to the students who were being bullied, and they wanted to talk to the students that were doing the bullying. And what they did was they taught us that bias and bullying, name calling, and anything that you can find in these elementary, middle, and even high schools, they taught me that those were the things that lead to the race relations that we're dealing with in our country, and even to things as large as genocide. And I continue to work with the Anti-Defamation League as they continue to invest in education and invest in showing the students that they were the solution. And they convinced us that we had the power to make a change, and we had the power to stop some of the people who were sparking these differences. So I eventually went on to travel to Washington, D.C. on the National Youth Leadership Mission, and I was met with students from all over the country, as well as ADL delegations from all over the country, other professionals like the ones in this room who also cared, and they taught us about the history of the Holocaust. But they also taught us about some of the current events that were occurring today in our country. And we received leadership training, we received bias training, and they entrusted us with those skills to go back into our schools and to share them. And that's all they wanted us to do. They wanted us to spread the word, to spread the message, and to make sure that it didn't just stay with us. And eventually, a couple years later, I wanted to stay involved. I made sure that I did. I was blessed with the opportunity to travel to Israel with the Anti-Defamation League, and what that did was that taught me so much more than I had ever learned in school. They provided me with history lessons, lessons on Jewish history, lessons on the Israeli-Palestinian crisis, and lessons on how important the things we were learning in school were and how important the work of the ADL is today. And they just taught me that investing in education was the start, and that I had the power to make a change, and I just made sure that I didn't allow their message to stop there.
Wow, that's inspirational. A quick shameless promotion for Jayla. Jayla's mother is here, sitting in the front row. Your daughter is amazing. You've done a great job. Let me take a moment now. Let's start to open it up for questions. I want the audience to get involved. I've got a microphone up here. So there's a microphone. There's 2 podium stands here. I'd ask you just to come up and stand at the microphone. And while we're waiting for our first courageous questionnaire, Ben, no pressure. You don't have to ask a question. While we're waiting for our first question to come up, I want to ask my colleague, Allison Goodman, if you wouldn't mind standing up for just a second. And if I want to ask all... Allison, the regional director for ADL here in the Southeast. And I want to ask all the ADL staff in the room, if you wouldn't mind standing up, holding up your hands. I want to make sure everyone sees who you are. Thank you. So as we start to get questions, and I see one of our board members is going to ask a question here in a second, I want to make sure that some of our staff are connecting with you all on the margins of this session.
Thanks, George. Following up a little bit on our lunchtime conversation, which everybody couldn't have with us, but Jonathan in the book ceremony talked about fighting intolerance, fighting hate, fighting bigotry as not being Jewish history issues, Democratic issues, Republican issues, which is also well exemplified in the book. But in this very polarized world we live in, where politics seeps into everything, I was wondering if the panel could comment on strategies to address these issues and what to do when people want to make them political issues. Because people always think, well, if you're for immigration, well, then you're at one place politically compared to somebody that's against immigration. Just some thoughts on ideas for that.
And Jonathan, while that question was directed towards you, I want to broaden it just slightly. And that was a great question. And I want to broaden it just slightly. And Christian, when we're thinking about the neo-Nazi and white supremacist movements in the US, I think some people in their minds have an idea as the demographic that those groups recruit from. I wonder if you could share some information with us about the types of demographics that we see join the movements that we've seen most recently in Charlottesville and elsewhere.
Sure.
And Jayla, if you wouldn't mind expanding a little bit about the types of age ranges, socioeconomic statuses, races, backgrounds, ethnicities that you've been able to touch likewise with some of the work that you've helped ADL with. Jonathan, over to you to kick it off.
I think that, speaking just for me in terms of strategies, I think that reporting, journalism is probably the front line on this issue. In this administration, reporters are being attacked, they're being denigrated, they're being devalued. The news that we write is all fake. And I think that the thing that reporters can contribute to keeping these issues alive and front and center so that the public is aware of them is to report. I mean, not to be intimidated and to get the news out. I mean, get the facts and check and double check. I mean, you know, my first editor once said to me, he said, "Broder, if your mother tells you she loves you, check it." And so get it right, because the minute you get it wrong, they're going to jump on you, and they're going to discredit you, and you'll lose all your credibility. And so you gotta, you know, it's important a lot of times to get things first, you know, to get that scoop before everybody else. It's more important to get it right. I'd rather be second and right than first and have to go back and do a correction.
You know, in the last 23 years since I left the movement, I've seen it change drastically, at least the way it's packaged. They've gone from what most people would think of when we think of white supremacists, you know, skinheads and Klansmen and swastikas, to something that's very normalized. What we saw in Charlottesville with, you know, the khakis and the polo shirts, and Jonathan and I were talking, I mean, it was as if they were all frat boys that just came out of the dorms. And that to me is both scary and dangerous because the problem is harder to quantify. We know it exists. We know it's surging. We know that more than ever young white men are joining this movement. But it's harder and harder to track because they look like our sons, our daughters, our neighbors, our cheerleaders. You know, when I work with people, when I work to help people disengage from the movement, I don't argue with them. I don't debate them. I don't make it political. What I do is I listen. And I listen very closely for what I call potholes in their lives, the things that happened that deviated their path onto the one that they're on, because it is a learned behavior in most cases. And I'm trying to build the resilience of people versus trying to get my point across in a political way. I know that had I been 19, 20 and somebody would have told me I was wrong, it would have pushed me further away. So I really do believe in the idea of pulling people in closer and focus on the human instead of the shell, the self-hatred, the low self-esteem that causes people to go down that path that manifests as hatred. So I think it's really important that we, you know, and I say this all the time, that we treat the child, the inner child, instead of the monster. Because if we look at everybody who says something ugly or does something ugly as an irreparable monster, we're going to keep feeding this monster because we're going to keep pushing them away and marginalizing them, which is why, in most cases, they gravitated towards that movement to begin with, is because they felt like they didn't have a place to belong, and that movement gave them the license to be angry, to be violent, and to hurt other people because they were hurting.
Jayla, as you think about these issues, just picking up on the last question, you've, I know, met and been encountered with issues related to race, ethnicity. To the point of the question, there's a different view on political issues. That's often a divisive and unconstructive dialogue in this country. And as someone who's participated in a trip and a mission to Israel, and you've talked with both Palestinians and Israelis, you've seen both sides of the argument. How do you think about how to address some of these issues in a very heightened state, whether it be politically, racially, ethnically, or religiously?
Well, there's an exercise we do in a lot of different ADL programs, and it's called like an iceberg. So what you do is you start off by looking above the iceberg, so looking above the waterline. So the things that you can see about someone, their race, you can see maybe their age, if you're thinking hard enough, the things that show directly to face. But below the water, there's some things that you don't necessarily see about a person. You may not be able to see how they worship, where they come from, their education. You may not be able to see their background. And sometimes we come to realize that these are the things that prompt the way we think. These are the things to persuade the way we believe, the way we vote, the things we want to talk about at the political table. And so sometimes we have to learn to look below the water and to analyze those things and to get to understand a person from their core. And so I think that's usually the issue when we have these conversations. For the past 2 years, there's been two main divisive issues that have been dividing us as a nation or as a people, and that's been our geography and our education. And sometimes these are things that we don't necessarily pay attention to. So someone who's from a completely different area from me may believe or think differently than I do, but that's because they didn't grow up the way that I did. They didn't have the same influences. They didn't see the same things within their homes. They didn't have the same background that I did. And sometimes education can also be that dividing factor. So they may not have learned the things that I learned in school. We may not have had the same history lessons, or they may not have had that lesson at all. And sometimes we have to stop and think about those two things, or just think about things below the water in general, and to recognize that sometimes those are the things that are persuading people to think that the way that they do. And when we understand that we grow up differently and we have different backgrounds, we can better resonate with people and we can better come to a conclusion. We can sit down and we can talk about it. And we don't have to go back and forth based off of the different things that we believe.
Perfect. Thank you, Jayla. Sir, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure, David Lewis. The statistics you cited at the beginning in your remarks, George, were quite striking in that they coincide with recent political changes in this country, shall we say. What I'm curious about for each of the panelists is that if you had 2 minutes one-on-one with the president to discuss this subject, what would you say to him?
David, thank you for asking an easy one.
George, you want me to go first on this one?
I'll open it up, frankly. I think the ADL statistics in the report kind of speak for themselves. And as I mentioned, we kind of documented it year by year over the past decade plus. Focusing on the solutions here, which is the most important part of this conversation. Let's open it up to the panel. Please take the question any way you'd like.
And George, you know this well. I may have the most expensive tweet in the history of Twitter.
Why don't you give the audience some context on that?
Okay. Well,
I didn't include that part in my introduction, but feel free to.
So I co-founded an organization called Life After Hate, and we had developed a program, an intervention program online to help people disengage. And it wasn't just focused on the far right, it was going to focus on all types of extremism. After the election, well, we applied for a grant and we won it. We won a $400,000 grant under President Obama. Then the administration changed. And we waited patiently to see what was going to happen next, if we were going to get, or when the $400,000 was coming to develop this program. And we got a nice email from the Trump administration, and I say nice with quotes around it, that said that essentially we weren't going to get the grant. Weren't really given very much reason about it, but I suspect it's because I was slightly angry on Twitter after the election and directed a comment at the president that is still haunting me to this day. But no, you know, in reality, what I would say to him, and I wouldn't say much, I would listen, really, and made sure that I really believe in holding people accountable. I've held myself accountable for the last 23 years, and I will continue to do so. And I think it's all of our jobs to stay visible, to be vocal, to be vigilant, but not to be violent. Because I think sometimes when we are so full of anger at people that are saying and doing ugly things, sometimes we want to respond in the same ways that they respond. And what I would say to that is we cannot become them. That we have to stay visible, vigilant, and vocal, but we have to maintain our composure and not adopt their tactics. So that's as far as I'll go.
Jonathan, you're in the Oval Office. You got 2 minutes.
I got 2 minutes.
What are you going to say?
Well, I think I would narrow my ask to something very specific.
Okay.
And then I think to be effective, as opposed to do what I really want to do, I would flatter him. because he responds to flattery. And I would tell him how wonderful he is and how we could depend on him to, you know, do the right thing, and because he's such a good, sensitive, and empathetic. I feel like Colbert. I'm just kidding. You know, I mean, you know, if we're talking just strategy here, I would flatter him and appeal to his better angels.
All right, so
such that they are.
Jayla, this is tough. You've got listening, you've got engaging in flattery. You've got 2 minutes in the Oval. You're sitting one-on-one with the president. What's your conversation look like?
Neither of those. But I think mine would look similar to like what your introduction looked like. I would definitely love for him to see and to recognize some of the changes that we've seen over the past year or so, and to show him the differences between the statistics within the years. And then maybe I'd flatter him because maybe that'll get him to listening to it.
But wait a minute, what guarantee do we have that he would even listen? Because he likes to talk.
We're in a scenario here,
Right,
so
okay.
anything goes. Sir.
You can always resort to Twitter again. if you like.
Sir, please.
My question is really directed to a different audience. Good luck going into the Oval Office with that.
I've been
with
there.
That request. I was really struck, J-Lo, with your story about ADL coming to your school and then coming into your classroom and somehow engaging your imagination. Now, the fact that your mom's here and knowing what you're studying and you're a valedictorian, not surprised that you would have a curious mind. And Christian, you actually mentioned, I want to engage 14-year-olds, right? Get them early. I guess my question is, what is the framework? What is the language? What is the practice to engage young people? And then, because I'm so encouraged with the Parkland kids, you know, around gun violence and the organizing they're doing. But more importantly, how do we sustain that? You know, because when you're young, you jump here and there and try this and try that. But how do we sustain folks? I'm a baby boomer. We were blowing everything up in the 60s. A lot of us went out and made money and forgot about it. Some of us stayed with it. And I'm interested in how we're going to engage young people to stay in the fight.
Jayla, please.
Yeah, I can go. I think the first step is just to listen to them. So definitely hear what they have to say, provide them with that platform to speak and to tell their story, because you'd be surprised. We have a story. A lot of young people have the story. So listen to them, and then once you hear their story, invest in them. And that's hard for some people to do just because it may not seem like a worthwhile investment, or it may not seem like it's going anywhere anytime soon. But it will definitely be worth it, and you'll watch the ones who care and who are truly passionate, who truly want to be there. You'll watch them bloom and pop up and reoccur and keep coming back like no other, just because they see that you care, that you're listening, and that you want to help them, and that you want them to create the difference that we're trying to see. So listening and investing.
Actually, can we, I want Christian and Jonathan to jump in on that, engaging with young people.
I mean, my answer really is not that different. Young people don't want to be talked to, they want to be heard. They're idealistic, they're passionate, and as adults, I think we need to empower them. And I think we'd be very surprised that if we step back and provide the support and amplify those passions, how brilliant and amazing young people can be if we give them the chance to be. As adults, we tend to prescribe solutions. And I think that's often a mistake because we grow up differently. We have different experiences. Our kids grew up in a different generation with new technology. For some of our kids, the only president they knew up until the election was an African-American president. The things that they've seen, the divisive things like the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, 9/11, this is what, as adults, we kind of gloss over. For a 15-year-old or an 18-year-old, that is their life, and we have to understand the things that have happened. So I really do believe in empowering and providing support and guidance, but not dictating what it is that young people do.
Jonathan, you've probably interviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of young people across the globe. Tell us if you take away anything substantively different.
What I find is that I think what we can contribute is mentoring. In other words, it's a combination of listening and hearing the passion, and then directing that passion and giving it a focus and giving it strategies, for example. I mean, I was struck, for example, when a lot of the young people came up from Florida to demonstrate against guns. And I was there, I talked to a lot of the young people, and what struck me was that some of them felt that this demonstration alone was going to solve the problem. That, one shot, our voices are so important that this is going to solve the problem. And I think it's important to take that passion seriously, but also to teach and to mentor and to say, look, things, protest movements don't achieve their goals immediately. You have to stay at it. You've got to be committed. I mean, just look at the civil rights struggle. Look how long that went on. The gun struggle is still going on, and it's going to go on for a long time. Movements, social movements, protest movements take time. And America is a country, if you teach kids American history, you'll see that America is a country that learns lessons, then it forgets lessons, and then it learns them again, hopefully. One of the pictures in the book is an advertisement for a soap. And it was an advertisement from 1880. And it shows Uncle Sam kicking someone who's Chinese into the, off the coast. There it is, right there. All right? That's actually an ad for soap. And the period of time that this ad came out was in 1880, when there was tremendous prejudice and antipathy toward Chinese. But it was part of an anti-immigrant sentiment that was sweeping the country. Chinese came in great numbers with the California Gold Rush in 1849. And then more came in, they helped build the Transcontinental Railroad. But by the 1880s, there were a lot of Chinese in America, and the feeling was among white Americans that they were stealing jobs, they were depressing wages, and a lot of the things that you are hearing right now were directed toward the Chinese. And it got so bad that you would have ads like this. That's how you sold things, because anti-Chinese sentiment was so popular. And in 1882, Congress passed a law called the Chinese Exclusion Act. And what this law did was it immediately stopped any more Chinese laborers from coming into the United States. No more. Just close the door, just like Trump is trying to do with Muslims now. The second thing that it did was, if you were a Chinese already in America, you were immediately declared a permanent alien, so which meant you could never attain citizenship. And even those Chinese who had attained citizenship, if you were a Chinese American citizen and you wanted to go back to, I don't know, Hangzhou or Guangzhou to go visit your family, you couldn't get back in again. That's what the law provided. Now, this law was passed in 1880. This law was on the books for 60 years. 60 years. It was only repealed in 1943. And why? Not because there was a sudden, progressive enlightenment. It was because the United States, in the middle of World War II, needed to solidify its relationship with China in order to confront the Japanese. So for purely pragmatic geopolitical reasons, Roosevelt got the law repealed and said it was a historic mistake. So, so things repeat themselves. And I think it's important for young people to understand that, like I said, America is a country that learns lessons, and then another generation comes that knew not Pharaoh, and they forget these lessons, and they have to learn them again. And it's worth, teaching young people this, that the good fight is a long fight.
Let's.
Seems to me like that is still happening, that it's just moved from group to group, back to some groups.
Yeah.
I don't know that we forget. I think we just change. The way African Americans are portrayed in film, as gangsters and things like that. I don't
Or
know
Arabs.
I don't know that anything has changed. I just think white people forget. And remember, and then forget, and remember. I don't think anybody else forgets. But
So I want to go to Kenny for a question, and then ma'am, you're on deck, and sir, you are next. Sorry.
Thanks, George. I'm going to join my friend David Lewis, my fellow provocateur, in asking another challenging question. And I'm sure you're familiar, there's been some recent press coverage that has challenged ADL, American Jewish Committee, other organizations, saying they have not been forceful enough in speaking out on these issues, given the serious nature of the threat we face and as you outlined in your opening remarks. And I was wondering if you could respond to that criticism and also just speak to the challenge that you face as an organization, your panelists, threading that needle in this very challenging political environment of how to speak out without doing it in such a way that it limits your effectiveness. And just as us as Americans, are we too apathetic? Have we become too resigned to sort of the current state of affairs and not doing enough to speak out given the severity of the challenges that we face right now?
Kenny, thank you for that very easy question. Let me start with the first on the balance with how strong to be on which message, and I'll get to the latter in a second. So ADL is an organization, just to put this in context, and it's in some of the materials, and Jonathan alluded to this earlier. ADL was founded in 1913, and it was founded with the mission statement to protect the Jewish community in this country, protect against anti-Semitism and hatred and bigotry targeting the Jewish community in this country, and to work diligently to secure justice and fair treatment for all people. And the way that ADL has executed that mission in the past 100 years has taken a lot of different forms. And I'll give you one specific example to try to answer your question really directly. Last Thursday, was the Senate Foreign Relations Committee confirmation hearings for CIA Director Mike Pompeo to become the Secretary of State. And there was also the public announcement of John Bolton as National Security Advisor. And as someone who worked at the National Security Council, has been in government for a long time, knows the dynamics of these positions, I can tell you that firsthand, but I can also tell you that the ADL and other advocacy organizations, irrespective of their identity, care very deeply about these positions because the positioning of America in the global community is critical, and the Secretary of State is among the most important positions. And so there was strong discussion and deliberation within our organization, given some of the statements and positioning, not related to Israel, not related to Jewish American issues, but because of some of their records and because of some of their statements in which there's been associations and statements that have been Islamophobic and associations with organizations that spewed anti-Muslim bigotry, as well as some of the positions that they've taken against the LGBTQ community and associations with organizations that have not had favorable positions on a range of equality issues. And so the statement and the position that ADL put out was not supporting and not saying that Director Pompeo should not go forward with confirmation or asking the Senate to deny his confirmation hearing. We did, to the point earlier that Christian and Jonathan were alluding to, we did deep and substantive analysis of the facts, of the statements, who said what, who said where, and we debated what position politically to take on this issue. And at the end of the day, we submitted a public statement that's on our website that makes sure that public officials for confirmation, or like the National Security Advisor who's not up for confirmation, are held accountable for the things that they've said publicly and the people that people and organizations that they're associated with. And so it's tough because it's real easy to say they've got a good position on Israel, go for it. Or it's real easy to say they've got people that we don't like that they're close to, or that they've made statements that we don't like, so we're not going to support their confirmation. I think it's too easy to do that. To the question earlier about how to balance the politics here, I think the details are important, statements matter, and to the point that both Jonathan, Jayla, and Christian alluded to earlier, and I think they're living testaments of this, is what you say matters, and accountability needs to be held to public officials in this environment that you are today than really in any other environment. And so I think the positioning, and if that's a position that ADL is going to get criticized for, it's a fair critique. If we're not going to say yay or nay, and if we're going to say let the public hold and the Congress hold public officials accountable for their statements, I think that's a fair position to take. But let me stop there and see if anyone else on the panel wants to jump in on that as well.
And American apathy, does our level of outrage match
Yeah.
the level of crisis that we face right now?
You know, I was having a conversation earlier and with some of the ADL board members earlier this afternoon, and do all of you know the events of happening this weekend here in Georgia? Does everyone know about those? Some heads nodding. Allison, do you want to share a quick snapshot of that with some of the folks here? Because I'll answer that question with an anecdote.
Yeah, so if you haven't seen the news, there's a white supremacist neo-Nazi rally in Noonan, the National Socialist Movement. They do an event every year on Hitler's birthday. I was actually talking about it with Christian earlier, and he's like, oh yeah, duh. Like, of course they're going to have this. It's 420. Like, what else happens? It's in Noonan, Georgia. We're expecting a decent-sized crowd, as well as violent counter-protesters and peaceful counter-protesters. So we've got kind of both.
So as we were discussing this earlier, as an ADL community and as an ADL family, Kenny, the question that was asked to me by one of the folks there was similar to yours on the level of pushback, but it was specifically here within Georgia. And they said, George, you know, what are the reports saying? How many people are going to be there? And the reports that we've seen is anywhere between 75 and 100 people are going to show up to this rally, to this event, in which there's like a rally, there's a social period and whatnot, that are all neo-Nazi, white supremacist type individuals. And so the question that the group was deciding amongst themselves was, what's the right response? And we were talking about this, and my response to them was, part of the work that we do with law enforcement training, we do a program called Law Enforcement in Society, and part of the work we do in some of our education work is really teaching about the Holocaust, genocide, and different atrocities across the globe. And the perspective that I shared with the group was, it doesn't matter if it's 50, it doesn't matter if it's 75. Are you going to do something if it's 105 or 110 or 65 or 73? Like, you can't put a magic number on the public's ability to push back on clear and open demonstrations of anti-Semitism, bigotry, xenophobia, and Islamophobia. You can't put a number on that. But what I do know is in some of the courses that we train and that we teach and we engage and we instruct young people and teach our partners in federal, state, and local law enforcement on critical thinking is, you know, when is it okay to not do something? When is it okay to just keep going and say, well, it's only going to be 75 crazy neo-Nazis who are showing up there. We're just going to let those guys go. When is it okay to just walk away from that and not do something? The lessons, if anything, I've learned as a student of history and studying the Holocaust and genocide and what we've seen in Darfur and Sudan and elsewhere across the globe is that it's never okay if more than one person is coming together to spew that level of hatred and bigotry and xenophobia. And especially, I don't live in Georgia, I'm in from Washington, D.C., but especially if it were happening in my hometown where I lived and I worked and where my kids went to school, that's not okay. So I guess the answer to your question is, people are busy and people have schedules and I'm not going to go counter-protest some neo-Nazis or some white supremacists. But the questions you have to ask yourselves individually is going to the gym or going to the grocery store or doing something else that day, is that okay too? And I don't think we need to drop everything in our lives to push back against what we're seeing. I don't think we need to be consumed by it, but the level of consciousness needs to be raised and an awareness of what's happening, where in the country and how in the country, and not just in terms of cities like this in Noonan, but in the online spaces as well. The consciousness needs to be raised and civil society needs to continue to pull itself together like we're doing in this room. So that's not a clean answer, but that's my answer, if that's okay.
Can I just add one thing?
Please.
I would challenge the premise that we're apathetic, that the country is apathetic. I think now, given who is in the White House and the kind of issues that have been raised by this administration, I have never seen the country more engaged. I mean, I'm a boomer, so I remember what it was like during the 60s. The feeling that's out there now among the public, I would say is comparable to what was happening in the 60s. It's not the war in Vietnam, it's a different issue. It's somebody who is in the White House, and if you listen to James Comey the other night, who is morally unfit to be president. I mean, I'll say it. There, I said it. Okay? And I think that a lot of people in this country, there are more people who are engaged than there are apathetic. I think that there are people who defend Trump, but they're just as passionate in their defense of Trump as I would say we are in our, opprobrium of him. But I think people are engaged. I mean, in a way, it's dangerous because some people have said that the country has never been more divided before. The last time that we were this divided was either, Vietnam or the Civil War. I mean, the country is deeply, deeply divided. And those kind of divisions are not a symptom of apathy. That's a symptom of two very, very distinct camps that are clashing. But fortunately we have a system of elections. We also have impeachment. I don't know whether impeachment is the right thing to do at this point. It might be used against Democrats. But we do have elections, and which makes us, different than other countries that have gone through authoritarian periods. So, vote. Get out there. Vote.
Let me. There was a yes. I answered your question. I hope it was a really good.
Can I just
good
add
question.
to that? I mean,
please.
I do worry about apathy. I do worry that because we have two sides divided, constantly going at each other, that at some point it's going to become so normalized and such a part of our fabric that we'll become desensitized to it. As it is, the face of the movement, the packaging is already normalized. It's already hidden amongst us. And I just worry that as the language keeps getting more fervent and more, extreme, that we are going to lose the ability and the sensitivity that, hopefully we've been cultivating for our history and getting to a point of progress, but not getting there yet. And I do worry about that. I do worry about it.
Sir.
I'm Miles Alexander, and I wanted to try to put something in perspective from my age and then ask a question. I was a freshman at Emory in 1948 when I joined ADL. The military was segregated. Japanese Americans had been put in concentration camps. Women could get jobs in any business. Blacks couldn't get jobs in most businesses. Jews couldn't go to law firms, medical schools, except in quotas. I found and most of us worried about, in backing Israel, whether we'd be accused of split loyalties. Every time there was a crime committed, an African American would hope the person wasn't black, a Jew would hope they weren't Jewish, Hispanics would hope they weren't, because this was a country that was built not as you attribute it, America first, which I've always felt strongly about, but it was really ethnic first. I found in my lifetime the impetus for change has come from youth. The 60s was the greatest generation in my time because people came out of school and made businesses change, made them take women, made them take blacks, made them take Jews, made them take Hispanics. And I was raised following the Holocaust. And it always occurred to me, why didn't they give sanctuary to Jews? They didn't have to make them citizens. They just had to give them a place to go. And I ask you why this country hasn't come together to give sanctuaries to Holocausts around the world where people are being killed in Sudan and Syria.
I think it's because we haven't addressed or acknowledged our own genocide. Most countries that have become healthier after a genocide have acknowledged it. We haven't done that yet for our African Americans and our native populations. And it's also, I believe, the way we pitch our country that we are a nation of immigrants is also very exclusive. We are not only just a nation of immigrants, but we are a nation of natives, immigrants, ex-slaves. And until we come to terms with that, I don't know that we are going to get past this because we are always operating at a level of privilege.
Jaya? Or either one of you.
Okay. When I talked before about the founding documents, Constitution, Declaration of Independence, the ideals, this is the ideal form of the United States. This is the theory, the idea of the United States. And as someone who loves the English language, I never liked the phrase, a more perfect union. It's more perfect, it's either perfect or not perfect. It's like, slightly pregnant or, but we're constantly striving to perfect this ideal that our founding documents and our founding fathers gave us. And we fall short. There are lots of periods in our history where we fall short. The turning away of the St. Louis, the way the Jim Crow laws. There's countless examples. That's what the whole good fight is about. And one of the things about in working on this book, we were Rick Smolin, the guy who had the idea to put this together with Jonathan Greenblatt from the ADL. They got together for a meeting, and they were talking about the 100 years of the ADL and everything that's been accomplished and the role that the ADL has played in the good fight of various minorities and groups in the United States. And the idea of, well, let's do a book on this. Let's trace the history of each group's good fight. And the whole point of the book at that time was to show how far we've come. Because, let's face it, life is better for Latinos and African Americans today than it was 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. Because we have evolved legally, we've evolved socially. But putting the book together occurred during the 2016 presidential campaign, when all of these other things, when Charlottesville was happening. And we realized that the book couldn't be just a retrospective. It had to be not only about the battles that have been won, but the battles that still have to be fought. And I think that we have this ideal, and we try to attain it. The courts try to attain it. We try to attain it in our daily lives. And we fall short. And we keep on trying. And that's what I was saying about America as a country that learns, it forgets, or it ignores, or it finds another way to go at the thing that they wanted to do initially. But it's America is a work in progress, I guess is the way to say it.
Jayla, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can. I think sometimes as Americans we have our own idea of development or as assistants, and sometimes that doesn't necessarily align with the people who need the developing or who need the assistance. So we don't necessarily listen to their needs or pay attention to their situation and see how we can best help them. But instead, we kind of go with our idea of what would be best for them or how we can assist them or change their situation. And I think that's why we haven't opened up our home as a sanctuary.
Great, thank you. We're going to start to take, just because I'm being mindful of time, I want to make sure that we take 2 questions at a time to get to the folks that are still standing, so you have time to get your questions in. So Ben, if you wouldn't mind starting, and then I'm just going to come right over here.
Ben Garland from the Atlanta Falcons. I wanted to ask, if you were given an NFL platform, what would you do? And if you were at a community service event like a Boys and the Girls Club or something like that, what would you do to make the biggest impact?
Okay, hold that. Ma'am? And I'll let the panelists kind of pick which questions they want to go in on.
So my name's Stacy Ramirez, and I'm with the ARC Georgia, and I am an adamant advocate for those with intellectual developmental disabilities. I uphold the civil and human rights of those with intellectual developmental disabilities, and I work hard to make the invisible visible. So as a takeaway, I'm always wondering what other organizations, what strategies you use to help those who don't have as loud a voice as some of the powerful voices in this room to be heard. So what are the strategies you use to help others' voice be heard? And what can we do as a group? Someone used the word collective impact. So if ADL as the backbone of collective impact, what do we use to help those that don't use language the way we do be heard?
So on the 2 questions, just to recap, it's not very often that people are in a room with more than one NFL player at the same time on purpose, right? And so we're in a room with a group of people and with an organization that has put tremendous amount of prioritization on the social impact of their work. So thoughts or guidance from the panel on the platform of the NFL. And on the second question, and thank you very much for raising that question, I think, ensuring, and as we see by the book, that disability rights for people that may not be able to literally stand or speak for themselves is part of the conversation, is certainly near and dear to my heart personally, but something that the organization looks at in the totality of civil rights work. But whether you're talking about disability, language, access, and Jay, in your presentation, you talked about giving voice to the voiceless. I wonder if you can expand a little bit on that. So maybe if we can start with you and open it up to the others.
Well, I've always found power in storytelling and just listening to others and helping them tell their story. So we may not know some of the struggles that other people may deal with and how it can be hard for them to comprehend some of the things that we're talking about, or just to share their side of the story. So if we can help them best tell their story and listen to them and help share and spread that story, then they can be better understood and they can have a seat at the table and join in on the conversation that we're having today.
I can give you an example just from my own life, if it helps. My wife works for an NGO in Washington that works with the State Department on bringing over international visitors. It's called the International Leadership Visitors Program. And they bring over people, the embassies, our embassies around the world choose up-and-coming people in various fields, and the State Department brings them over to the States to spend 6 weeks here, learning how we do what they do. So there's sort of some cross-fertilization. Some of these people are disabled. And the ADA requires, for example, hotel accommodations to take disabled people's disabilities into account. So my wife, one of her jobs is to go and visit hotels that want to be part of this program and to see whether the rooms are ADA compliant. And the stories that she comes back with about how people in the hotel say, oh yes, let me show you our ADA compliant room. And the light switch is up here. The lamps, you have to roll it with your fingers to turn it on, as opposed to doing it with your elbows. I mean, unless there's somebody there to tell them, put yourself in the place of somebody who's disabled. Somebody who's in a wheelchair and can't reach that light switch. The light switch should be down here. If there's a bathroom on the second floor off the lobby, is there a ramp? Oh, gee, I didn't think of that, So, it's a very small example for a much larger issue that you're asking about. But I think it's person by person. Building an awareness, if it's based on the law, but compliance with the law, but it's basically getting people to see through another person's eyes, through the disabled person's eyes, so that when you design a room or put a light switch in, you're thinking of that person. So it's basically person by person. I know it's a long process that way, but how else do you do it? You have to do it person by person, I think.
Christian?
I used to think that vulnerability was a weakness. And I've come to learn over the last 20 years that vulnerability is actually my greatest strength. And understanding empathy, and I think that's what we're talking about, the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and understand what they're dealing with. And I guarantee you, everybody here in this room is dealing with something that nobody else knows about, that we're all keeping the secret. And I think that for these young people who are vulnerable, who might feel marginalized or bullied, it is our duty to be vulnerable to them, to show them that we can be vulnerable so that they can feel allowed to be vulnerable too. And to answer your question, Ben, one of the things, I'm a huge soccer fan, European football. And I know that the Blank family just bought a soccer team a couple of years ago. One of the things that European soccer does really, really well is they specifically call out racism. They have campaigns where players are talking about racism, where it's not accepted at stadium. Teams are penalized if their fans are racist, if they say things to the players on the field. They will penalize those teams and say, for 2 games, you can't have any fans, you can't sell any tickets, you're going to play in an empty stadium. That to me is putting your money where your mouth is, right? That to me is taking a cause that we know is important, not making it political, but standing up for human rights. And I think that that's something that we should not be afraid to do, whether there's money, politics, or anything else involved, because human rights are something that we all depend on. And I would love to see, young kids look up to you guys. I look up to you guys. And it's important what you say. We pay attention. When Colin Kaepernick took a knee, the world paid attention. And unfortunately, that became a divisive moment where it could have been a moment of learning and teaching fans about what was happening, rather than narratives going back and forth about what he was thinking and why he was doing it, and was he un-American. I would love to see the unions, the players, the coaches, the owners stand up and say, these are our people, and we're going to stand up for them. And we're not going to allow anybody else to say anything.
I'd just like to add one thing, that one of the biggest villains, I think, in this whole issue of taking a knee was our president. Remember, fire the sons of bitches? Remember that? It extends all the way up to the top.
If I may, I'm going to take the prerogative because I have a microphone and I'm on the stage. I want to jump in on a theme that we discussed earlier, Ben, specifically to your question. Just going back to this concept that there are 3 really smart people on the stage here, and we need to talk about solutions as well. And so your question is really interesting, and one that within the ADL and a number of other like-minded organizations we've thought a lot about. And one of the things when we think about social change, when we think about racial, ethnic, and religious kind of justice and equality in this country, there are a number of ways in which that good fight can be achieved. One of the ways that ADL works at pretty regularly is in the courtroom, filing amicus briefs, working with our state, local, and federal legislatures to pass laws, to litigate. But another way that we really see change come about is through peer-to-peer networks. And when we look across the country, we had a question earlier in terms of how do you really motivate or engage young people? Well, one of the things that's pretty clear, and I think you partially said this in your question, was we get out to boys and girls clubs and we talk with young people a lot. Athletes, whether they're in the National Football League or whether they're on a college campus or whether they're in a high school or a middle school, elementary school, the athletes get looked up to. The athletes in many circumstances, if not the majority, are influencers in their social circles. And so the ADL put their thinking around this, and we created a sports leadership council to help engage athletes from the professional to the elementary school and all the way on up and down, to help really engage student athletes who are naturally born leaders and engagers in ways that they can be conveners of the conversations, so that they can bring together the diverse opinions like we see on the stage and in this room today. And so one of the things I would say is that while the time that you all as players respectively have is precious to get out and go to the Boys and Girls Clubs, and it's amazing work because there's, to the point that Jonathan was making earlier, there's no replacing the one-to-one connection that you make with someone ever. There's no amount of kind of dollars or marketing that can replace that. But to the extent that you all can lend your time and your names to national campaigns and national programs that are trying to create big tents and big umbrellas for people of all races, faiths, and ethnicities to come together to really unite on a certain set of issues, that's a powerful issue that helps create social change. So we will take 2 questions and then we'll close if that's okay. Ma'am.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to know if the ADL, because I don't know a lot about it, partners with
It's amazing. You should get to know it.
Well, I am. I'm learning, and
Okay.
and so now I'm interested, and I want to know if they partner with any interfaith organizations, because having been I've just heard Andrew Young twice, and Taylor Branch is a fellow alumni of mine from Westminster who wrote the trilogy on Martin Luther King. So when you look at that movement and look at the moral leadership, all those people that run Lorraine Motel were all ordained ministers. I just think about when you talk, Christian, about the normalization of this happened in Charlottesville, and how Martin Luther King said when he wrote letters from the Birmingham jail that it wasn't the KKK he was scared of, it's the white moderates who are more devoted to order than justice. And if you just have it, I wouldn't have asked this question, but since I've seen all these people, and I was next to John Lewis at the march in front with books, not bullets signed, because I'm a substitute teacher still. And so I just wonder about the moral leadership and the opportunity to have solidarity with people of different faiths. I'm a member of FAMA, which is the Faith Alliance of Metro Atlanta, and 2 of my friends are back here. And it strengthens your own faith perspective when you're around people of different faiths. So that I probably wouldn't have asked this question a week ago, or 2 weeks ago.
So before we jump in on that, let's take this last question and then we'll wrap.
This question is for Christian. Christian, somewhere along the way your narrative changed. How did that happen, and how, I just finished Martin Dempsey's book on radical inclusion, and he talks about the digital echo and what we have to battle with the digital echo and changing the narrative. How do we make the narrative personal to an individual and change that conversation?
So for the 8 years that I was involved from the time I was 14 until I was 22, I had questions every day, questioning my beliefs, questioning my actions, the words that I said. The inclusion, the acceptance, the perceived power was stronger than those questions were. You know, we all have the tools to be leaders. We all have the tools to be activists, but it doesn't mean having to go out and protest. We're teachers, we're parents, we're law enforcement, we're athletes. We all have the power to influence the people around us, and we all have different tools to do that. You know, if you're an artist, make art that's more inclusive. If you're a musician, you know, talk about it through your music, because music speaks so loud. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, don't be discouraged if you don't feel like you fit into one of these visible buckets of people out there holding signs or out there in marches. We have the ability to affect every person we touch every day, even if it's as simple as looking at somebody in the eyes when you pass them on the street. Because we all nudge each other's trajectories, whether we know it, recognize it, or not. And likewise, we're moved by other people. For me, it was exactly that. It was receiving compassion and empathy from the people that I didn't deserve it from, when I least deserved it. And that allowed me to humanize them, because I'd never had a meaningful interaction with the people I thought I hated. Never. My fault. I never wanted to. I never had the opportunity to. Yet I judged them. And when they humanized me, despite knowing how terrible the things were that I did and said, that allowed me to stop the demonization, the prejudice, the ideas that I thought, and they were replaced with experience and reality. So that's what we need to do, is we need to regain our empathy. We need to be compassionate. And I'll challenge you. Go out there and find somebody who you think doesn't deserve your compassion and give it to them, because I guarantee you they're the ones who need it the most.
That's a powerful note to close on, if that's okay, Jonathan.
Yes, absolutely.
Friends, please
Good
join me in
kicker.
giving a big round of applause to the panel. I know we had one or two last questions up here. Unfortunately, we're running short on time, so I need to bring the panel to a close. But my co-panelists are very gracious and very compassionate people. I'm sure they'd love to stick around and answer any final questions. I would like to thank everyone for taking the time to be with us tonight and take part in really a historic and very timely conversation. Particularly, I'd like to thank the good folks at the Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation, who have graciously and continuously supported ADL's work, specifically the programming here in Atlanta Public Schools, and especially the Washington cluster of schools here in the greater Atlanta area. And on behalf of the ADL, I'd like to say a very special thank you to them for my new consciousness that's been raised on the great work that they do and for their continued support. I'd like to ask everyone to join ADL and some of the good folks up here in taking action in the good fight by continuing the conversation by purchasing the Good Fight book, which is available in the back. We have a number of pins that you see Jayla and other folks wearing around that say "No Place for Hate." Please join us. Oh, I've got one on too, I forgot. Please join us in having a pin in the back and participating in a conversation with someone in the book. If you're looking for more information on some of these issues, for those of you, the majority of you that I know are on social media in some place, on Facebook, all the work that we do in this region is on ADL Southwest, Twitter, Southeast, wrong state, Facebook, ADL Southeast, Twitter, ADL Southeast, and Instagram, ADL_Atlanta. Last but not least, we have more than 200, ADL has more than 200 No Place for Hate schools where we do our programming in this region. Please find one of the folks who raised their hand earlier who works for ADL to learn more about these programs and help young people speak more frankly against hatred and discrimination. And please thank me in pledging my appreciation and gratitude to the Arthur M. Blank Foundation for their participation and support for a number of the programs that we run, and participating in the Read for Respect effort. And we will send around some information tomorrow to all the folks that have signed in today so that you can have all this packaged up nice and neat in your inbox. Have a great night. Thank you, everybody.